Here we are, on All Hallows Eve. The night when the veil between worlds seems to thin. The time when the air hangs heavy with the sense of unease. Join us as we celebrate by opening up the crypt and looking back at some of our favorite stories featured on The Creepy Side of NEPA over the past 5 years. Here now is your host and producer, Dan Kosloski.
Welcome to The Creepy Side of NEPA. I am Dan Kosloski. Happy Halloween, everyone. Here we are, Halloween night 2024. Before we get started with this special episode, just want to remind everybody listening, if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, or follow The Creepy Side of NEPA on whichever podcast platform that you're listening to us on. And also, be sure to follow WNEP's Creepy Side of NEPA on Facebook. That is the best way to always be informed on the latest show information. Even though this is Halloween night, this is not the end of the Creepy Side. As our return listeners know, we do keep this show going all year round. I usually take November, December off for the holidays, so we will be back with a new episode the last Thursday of each month, so our next episode will be released the last Thursday of January 2025. Now for tonight, a few weeks ago when I was trying to figure out episodes for our Halloween season, I was wondering what could we do special for Halloween night, especially since it lands on a Thursday. And then the idea hit me. Let's look back at some of our best stories throughout the 5 years, especially since The Creepy Side of NEPA is celebrating its 5th anniversary this year. Hard to believe that we started the show back in 2019. We sure did hear a lot of stories over that time. And these are some of my favorite stories. What better way to start a look-back episode than the beginning? We're going to look back at episode number 1, when Blaine from the Old Jail Museum and Jim Thorpe joined us and shared a story about a famous handprint.
Cell number 17. It has a handprint by Thomas Fisher. Before he was hanged, he took his hand, rubbed it in the dirty floor, slapped it on the wall, and he said, "This handprint shall remain here for eternity to shame the county who hung an innocent man." So the guards really thought nothing of it until they went in and cleaned out a cell. But the next day it came back. So again, they went to wash it off, but it came back. And they washed it off, painted over it, plastered over it, and even dug out that section of the wall, but it still came back.
So they actually built a new wall there and it came onto the new wall?
Yes.
Wow. So what was he actually convicted of?
He was convicted of murder. Back when the Irish came over to America, they were working in the coal mines, and they kept getting pay cut after pay cut, and eventually they got sick of it. So a bunch of them started to turn to violence. They started murdering other bosses and other miners. And eventually the boss started fearing for his own life, so he went to a detective agency and hired a spy for 2 years. The spy's job was to go into the mines, become friends with these men, learn their secrets, and then come up and rat them all out. So Thomas Fisher's name was on the list, so he was put on a trial, accused of murder. Now, when I say the word trial, I want to use it very loosely because on the jury, there's no Irish, no women, no Catholic, no coal miners, and all the men on the trial were sentenced to be hanged. There was 20 of them.
So all 20 were hung?
Yes, all 20 were hung. 7 of them were in the Old Jail Museum.
So he was just one of 7 being hung there?
Yes.
So do you have any personal experiences happen in the jail? Anything creep involving the handprint?
Nothing involving the handprint, but recently this year, actually, I was the last one in the building. I was making sure all the lights were off. So I went in to the cell block, peeked my head in, made sure there was no one else in there with me. And I saw, it looked like a woman in a black dress start to walk down into the dungeon. So I said, "Ma'am, you can't go down there. We're closed for the day. You have to leave." But she didn't answer. She just kept walking into the dungeon. So I hesitantly walked into the dungeon after her. I searched every cell in the dungeon, and there was not one person. So I don't know who that was messing with me that day, but it happened recently.
For our next story, we're going to look back at episode number 6, when Mark Keyes, director of the Pennsylvania Paranormal Association, joined us. And I have to say, this is probably One of, if not the creepiest audio recording I think I ever heard. Let's get right into the story.
Now, we did a case up in Tobyhanna, and it was in one of the private developments up there, and it was in an area, there's a lot of houses that are now up for sale there, a lot of foreclosures. There was a big drug problem in the development at one time. There was a lot of suicides, a lot of fights. It was kind of a development that was known for a lot of criminal activity. So a family bought this house and moved in and started having a lot of negative experiences. They felt like they were being, held down in bed and couldn't breathe and physically touched and scratched. And we wanted to go out there and do an investigation. And this one, I find particularly funny in a way because it's kind of a running joke amongst our team. Our medium, I'll preface it with this. She's from Queens, New York. She's got a pretty thick New York accent, and she's very animated, very high energy. And when we're out on cases, we try to be as quiet as we can, and especially if we're recording specifically to try to capture voices. She has a hard time not being able to speak. So she needs to speak. She says, I get the info, I got to get it out. So we have a real hard time keeping her quiet.
Yeah.
And, God bless her, we love her, but it makes it a little difficult for us to do the technical stuff sometimes. And she knows that because we're always joking around with her. So she is in the living room of this home.
Okay.
And she was sitting on a couch with one of our other investigators and stands up, and I think her knee or her leg cracks. You hear a crack, and she responds, that was me, because we tag any kind of noise that we make.
Of course, as we're going back, it isn't paranormal.
Exactly.
It's just
our
your
stomach growls. We cough, sneeze, something like that. We want to just tag it, for our recorders. So she stands up. You hear her leg crack, and she comments on that, and then you'll hear a voice come in. And this is an example of one of our better quality recorders.
And this is the house in Tobyhanna?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, those are my bones. 55-year-old bones.
Wow, that was the most clear one I think I've heard yet.
And to me, it was kind of hysterical when I heard it. I thought, am I hearing this right? To me, it sounds very plainly like shut up.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
And every person I've ever played it for says that. But again, our whole team kind of, says that to Virginia a lot. So it was just hysterical. My first thought was, even though it sounds nothing like him, wow, it was Jack, this other guy. And, thank God we got a lot of cameras around, and we know he's not talking at all at the time. But what's interesting is it appeared on our voice recorder, but not on a camcorder in the same room. So that also verifies that it wasn't Jack, the other guy. And that happens a lot when you get these recordings on recorders. If you have, say, 3 voice recorders in a room, you might pick it up on only one recorder.
But not on the other ones.
But not on the other 2. And there's some theories out there that these sounds come in a electromagnetic pulse, and if you're not where that transmission is per se, you're not going to pick it up.
Very close range, if you would.
Yeah.
Can you play that one again? That was one of the better ones I think I ever heard.
Sure.
Oh, those are my bones. 55-year-old bones.
There's even a little bit of echo, I think, in the room when you hear that, but that was one, again, like, I'm so super skeptic on most things. I'm like, that's got to be Jack. There's no other explanation.
It's got to be him. Clear.
Yeah, and if you heard Jack talk, even when he whispers, it's a different kind of sound that he makes. But like I said, I even went back and I checked the video on him, and he's just sitting there, doing nothing. He's not speaking at all. So that one
was a good one.
Kind of blew me away.
This next story was taken from episode number 8. This, I would have to say, was our most popular episode over the years. The episode about the Suskin Screamer. Joining us for this story is author Stanley Zurich, who wrote Suskin Screamer and Suskin Screams Louder.
I used to volunteer with Pittston Township Ambulance. We got a call in one night from PennDOT that one of their trucks reported that a boy ran out of the woods, right? They were up there plowing the snow, came running out of the woods, screaming for help, that his buddy's hurt and they need help back this trail, back this woods, right? Mm-hmm. Again, there's 18 miles of nothing up here.
Right.
So he's in the middle of nowhere. The guys stop the truck. They radio down. They get help. We get the rescue, the fire department, the ambulance. Everybody's up there, right? Guys parked right where this kid ran out of the woods. Mm-hmm. Tells us all about him, right? We're searching the woods. We can't find a footprint. We can't find nothing of this kid, right?
Right.
And he's saying what was odd was the kid was not dressed in modern clothes. He was dressed in clothes maybe somebody would have wore 20, 30 years ago. And he didn't. Most of the kids now are trained to say if something's wrong, call 911. Most people say, this kid, no, I need help, call help, call help. So there was every indication this kid was like from the past.
Right.
And that one I was involved on. We went up there on a search for that one.
And he was plowing, so I'm supposing there was snow on the ground.
A little bit of snow and ice, yeah.
Yeah, you would definitely see a footprint then.
Yeah, nothing. But these guys swear. I mean, why would a PennDOT truck call it in and stay stopped in the middle of the road waiting for us to get there?
Wow.
Yeah. It's in Suskin.
Very interesting stories.
It's amazing up there.
For our next story, we look back at episode number 13. This episode we called our Summer Campfire Series, where we had actual listeners call in and share their own personal experiences with us. Our first caller was a guy named John, who's a state trooper out in central Pennsylvania.
Early 1990s, I was working a midnight shift with Trooper Terry out of the Rockview Barracks in Center County. Sometime, it had to be a Saturday into a Sunday, we were asked to assist State Police Barracks at Phillipsburg. They were investigating a traffic fatality, and the victim lived in the town of Bellefonte. Now, Bellefonte has its own police department, but when the state police cover traffic fatalities, it is the state police who have to deliver the death notice to the next of kin. Mm-hmm. So since Bellefonte was closer to our territory than Phillipsburg's, our unit was given the assignment to do it. And it's not something we like to do. You know, you knock on somebody's door in the middle of the night, you're waking them up, they're going to be scared seeing cops at their door, and then boom, you got to give them this sad news. And you don't want to do it when they're alone. You want to make sure there's family present, or a neighbor they can trust, or even a priest or a minister that can come and sit with them while you're doing this. So we found the location. It was on East Bishop Street in Bellefonte, and Terry pulled up. He was driving that night, and we saw this man, elderly gentleman in his 60s. He's sitting on a porch swing, just going back and forth nice and slow, and he's smoking a cigarette.
And you stated earlier, this is about 2 a.m.?
Yeah, probably after 2, whenever the bars closed. Back then, they used to close pretty late there in Center County. Okay, so we're looking, and we figure, well, okay, the husband's home, usually easier to deal with than the mother. We walk up to the gentleman, and he says she's in there, and he gets up off the porch swing and walks around the side of the house. We're looking at each other like, wondering why he didn't want to stick around and find out why the cops are at his door.
Yeah, a bit odd.
So, kind of felt weird at the time. So Terry knocked on the door, finally got the woman up. We got somebody up inside, and it was a woman in her 60s. She came to the door, and we asked if she was alone, and she said no, she lived with her son, but he was out. And we're wondering, well, I'm wondering, what about the guy we just saw on the porch? So we asked if there's somebody that can come and be with her for a few moments, because we had some bad news to tell her. So she called her next door neighbor, and another elderly woman came over. And we sat them down. Terry explained to the woman that her son had been killed in a car crash in Port Matilda. And we gave her the information, what trooper to call, where the remains were taken, and how to arrange to take care of the car. And she was all shook up, which is obvious. And we stayed there as long as necessary. If she had any more questions, she needed anything. And then when she was, I guess when she realized, it came to realization, we're not making this up. We then started to take our leave, and the neighbor walked us out. And so, where's the husband? Why couldn't he be here? And that's when the neighbor said, well, he died in a car crash a few years ago, about the same location, just outside of Port Matilda. And I wanted to ask who was the guy sitting there, but I didn't want to start anything. Terry and I took our leave, went out, notified the barracks that the delivery was made so that they could release the name to the press, and we left. And every once in a while, the rest of that summer, we drove past that house in the middle of the night just to see if this guy was sitting on a porch swing again, and we never saw him.
Your story is definitely interesting. It is one of the. It just gives me the creeps thinking about it.
Yeah, we honestly, we never talked about it much after that. We would just look at the house, look at each other, and didn't say anything. In fact, I never said anything to anybody until my wife saw the response, your response to my email.
Well, that was the first time you told her?
Yeah, she didn't even know about it. That's, it's like not something you really want to talk about, because then people start wondering if you're having a problem,
Every time you get a story from law enforcement, it just gives it more credibility, I believe.
I don't know. We're trained investigators. We're assigned to do a job. We do the job. But then there are some things you don't want to poke your nose in too far because you don't know where the heck it's going to lead.
Exactly. Yep. Well, I'd like to thank you, John, for giving us a call and sharing that story with us tonight.
You're welcome, Dan. If you have any more questions, just give me a holler.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
You too. Take care.
We're going to take one more story from the same episode number 13. Kimberly from Sugarloaf, Pennsylvania, who I'm going to have to say had one of the most interesting stories I ever heard over the past 5 years.
And I was working in a mall. I was getting a drink at the store next to where I worked, and a man came up to me and said, "Oh, I love your curls." And I looked, and he just had this weird smile, and he left. And every so often I would be working, and we had a big window where we worked, and I'd see him walk by and smile. And every time I'd go to get somebody I worked with, I said, "This man is so creepy, you have to see him." And every time I get somebody, he's gone. And I kept telling my coworkers, "I'm telling you, this man," and I would tell them about him because I'd see him all the time when I worked. No one would see him. So I was the only one that saw him. And then I had a dream the one night, and I had a dream that this man was in my dream. And he took me flying out the window to show me this cemetery. And at the cemetery, there was a headstone of his name. I guess I didn't know it was his name at the time, but it was a name. And I thought that was really weird. And then when I woke up, my window was open, which when I went to bed, my window was closed. And I will never, ever forget that.
That is very odd, especially waking up and your window open. That would...
Well, right. So I don't know if I was sleepwalking. You don't know. But it was really weird. Yep. It was a little scary. And why was this guy I saw at the mall? Why is he in my dream?
And you saw him multiple times at the mall, you said?
Yes. And I told my friend about this dream, because this, cemetery, the whole thing. And I told him the name. And he was from the area where this man was from. He knew of this man. And he said, "Oh my gosh." So we went to look up some information on this. How am I dreaming, and how's this guy in my dream, all that kind of stuff. And when we went to go look it up at the library, the night before, this was in the Wilkes-Barre Library. Okay. The night before, the lady came over, and we were in the New Age or whatever that section was. And the lady said, "Can we help you?" And we're like, "Well, we're looking for these kind of books, I guess for dreams and all that kind of stuff." Mm-hmm. And she said, "Well, the weirdest thing is last night people broke in and stole most of the section that we were looking in." So I thought that was really weird. But then when we sat down, she gave us a stack of books and said, "Well, look through these." So we started to look through, and my friend said to me, "You need to sit down." I said, "Okay." And he showed me the picture of a man on the back of this book. And I said, "Oh my gosh, that's him." It was the man that I saw in my dream. And he goes, "Are you sure this is him?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I'm 100%. Like I knew it was him." He was even wearing the plaid shirt in the picture that I saw him in my dream. And I saw him at the mall. And he said, "Well, he died." And it was like, he died like, I don't know, maybe 7 years earlier than when we were looking at the book. And I said, "That can't be. I just saw him at the mall."
Yeah, right, exactly.
So it was a little freaky because I saw a dead guy. And we started to do research on him then. And we did go to the cemetery then. Well, my friend went first. because I was scared. I thought, this is weird. This man is in my dreams. I see him, it's creepy.
Of course, yep.
Here.
I totally agree.
Yeah. So he went first and he said, yes, I walked the way you told me the night that he took you in the dream. And he walked the way I told him. I drew it out for him. And he said it goes to his headstone in the cemetery. And that he is buried there. And it says that it's on his tombstone. It says, like, I will walk again to live among the living or something. So he always, supposedly in his life, always told people he will come back and he will walk among us.
I guess he was telling the truth, that's for sure.
Yes. And then we just did more research on him, found out he was a doctor and he was very, very intelligent, but he was known to dabble in the occult. And he had a lot of, people in his occult and, his little cult or whatever he did. And so it was a little creepy, but I never understood why I had to see him, why he visited me, it's just weird. So that was a little bit creepy.
And when you said his pictures on the back of the book, did he write the book you happen to be looking at?
Yes, he did. He wrote the book.
That's an even bigger coincidence that you actually were looking at his book right after that dream happened.
Exactly. It's the way it worked. It was very weird. It's creepy. And also the book that we found was actually the devil, and it was actually about the devil and God making a pact, and they were trying. The whole book was written weird. Like the devil and God were back and forth talking, and the devil was like about these college kids, and that he's going to get them on his side, and God said, no, I'm going to. It was weird. It was like they were back and forth trying to get people on their side, and actually in the end of the book, the devil won. So that was very creepy. It was a very creepy book.
The whole story seems a little creepy, to be honest with you. Kind of gives me the chills.
Yeah. And, he did come a few times after and bothered me a little bit in spirit. But I learned to set boundaries, learned to understand, and tell him to leave, and he's not welcome. So, again, with the spirit world, you can tell them to, you set your boundaries and say, you're not welcome. But yeah, that was scary. That was a scary time because I didn't know I could tell him to leave and he would listen.
Right. You didn't know what to do.
You think spirits are the boss or the ghosts are the boss, but really we can tell them to leave, and they have to listen.
Well, I'd like to thank you for joining us on the show and sharing those very good stories, interesting stories.
Thank you for having me.
Our next story is taken from episode number 31. Joining us is Mary Sullivan from the Mifflinburg Buggy Museum. Mary shared a bunch of stories, but this story sort of stuck out.
Well, there is one street, and this one's on Market Street, there were two people on this block that seemed to share the same ghost, and they didn't know it, and I didn't know it until I heard the story. And this would be, like, it would make sense. The one house, there was a housekeeper there that lived with this family. The family was fairly well-to-do, and the housekeeper lived with them for decades. She was one of the family. And eventually she got old and she died in the house. And, the family buried her or whatever and mourned her loss. But the housekeeper, at one point in time, I guess, decided not to stay gone and to come back and to continue to take care of the house and take care of the family. And so the son had grown up and gotten married and had married a woman that was from another country and she didn't speak English and so on. He brought her home and she stayed in one of the upstairs bedrooms overnight when they were doing the visiting, and she came down the next morning. And I'm giving away a lot of the story, but there's a lot more ghosties in Mifflinburg than this one. So anyhow, she came down the next morning, and she said about, who's that woman in the house? And they said, well, what are you talking about? And she said, well, she described this woman, and she said, well, who was here? She knocked on the door, and I opened the door, and she said, who are you, and what are you doing here? And she described her, and they looked at each other over breakfast and said, oh my God, that's Jenny. That was the housekeeper. And so it's like, okay, the house was haunted by the housekeeper. That makes sense. So then 4 doors down, the woman who lives in that house contacted me about her story. She said, well, we don't have a ghost, but she said, one time I thought we did. She said, we've never seen our ghost, but we had a visitor in the house. And they had a gentleman come visit from another country. And he said, I had the weirdest thing that happened to me last night. Maybe I had a dream, but there was a knock at my door, and I opened the door, and there was this woman standing there, and she said, "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" And it was the same ghost that had been 4 doors down. I think she must be very, territorial and very protective of her Mifflinburgers, because anybody that looked or sounded different was going to be questioned as to why they were there.
So it sounds like a lot of these people who, used to live in Mifflinburg kind of want to stay there even after they passed.
Once you get here, we're like the Hotel California. You can't check out no matter how hard you try.
I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this episode of The Creepy Side of NEPA, and I also like to thank everyone for joining us over the past 5 years. I gotta say, the time really flew, and I had a blast doing every episode. I am looking forward to the next year in The Creepy Side, and I'm also looking forward to all these new stories that we still haven't uncovered in northeastern and central Pennsylvania. With that said, if you know of a story or maybe an idea for an upcoming episode, let us know. Our email address is ghost@wnep.com. I hope everybody enjoys their evening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Halloween. Happy Halloween from everyone here at WNEP and The Creepy Side of NEPA. Until then, enjoy The Creepy Side of NEPA.
This has been The Creepy Side of NEPA. If you have a spooky story that took place in northeastern or central Pennsylvania, send it to ghost@wnep.com for your chance to share it on an upcoming episode. We're dying to hear from you.